Welcome, everybody. Any questions on the test at the moment? It should be graded hopefully by Friday. I'll have that back to you. But we'll see. Okay. So today we're jumping into lesson 4, and so we'll be moving also into Unit 2 of this material, which really is about working with the UI and talking about some more of the UI controls and things that exist in Android. So that's lesson 4 and lesson 5 for that material. Just for reference, the next test will be on the 5th of March. So you've got about 3-4 weeks until that next test. Today we're going to be going over 4.1. Tomorrow will be a lab day. I'm going to go, I think we'll kind of see how this goes, but I'm going to go over the slides and then we'll jump into a practical example. And I think I may just go through the code lab with you guys. My plan is to give you another worksheet for lesson 4, and you'll probably have that and hopefully have that tomorrow ready for you. And that will be kind of more of a free form lab, so you guys can get some experience with kind of building and designing things and applying some of the things we've talked about so far, as well as kind of maybe getting a start potentially on your final project, because this is a good time to start talking about that. So that's one of the things that you'll have on your plate for the next 3 weeks, is you'll have a worksheet to kind of start on building some of that out. Okay?
Yep.
So one of the things I need you to do, and I already sent out a link for this in the Discord, but I need you to create your new repo for this unit, because again, we're starting on Unit 2 now. So you follow the link in the Discord. That should take you to a page like this. You'll want to say accept the assignment. From there, you'll see a place like that, and eventually it'll create the repo. So as you can see here, it says we're configuring your repository now. Take a few minutes. Refresh this page to see updates. So once that finishes, you should get something like this. Remember, you want to go to the green button here that says code, pull that drop down, and copy this. Right. So I'm gonna copy that. I'm gonna clone my repo down, and this is going to be my Unit 2 repo. Okay. So if you would clone that, accept the assignment and clone it. Once you have done that, please go ahead and thumbs up the post in Discord. Mo, are you here?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you doing the instructions?
Yeah, I just thumbs it up.
Okay, but are you actually doing what I asked you to? Okay, cool. it hadn't flipped over yet. All right, thank you. Okay, so that's pulled down. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, I'm going to jump into the slides. You can follow along here as well if you want to. They're over in Perusal, and so we're going through lesson 4.1 today. So some of this, we've gotten a little bit of introduction to working with buttons already. Buttons, in some sense, are not too hard to deal with. You just basically click on them and things happen. But there are some more things that you may want to know about. So things we're going to talk about is some of the other gestures that you can utilize. We're not really going to do too much with that, but there are some additional gestures in Android. We'll talk a little bit about the floating action button and where that fits in. We'll talk about, kind of making images that you can click on, which is part of the lab for this lesson, and going through lesson 4. So we'll kind of talk about some of this user interaction and buttons as they pertain to Android. Now, obviously there's a reading chapter to go with this 4.1. I will mention that there are a few things in here that are a little bit out of date, and I made a bunch of comments on the 4.1 reading assignment where things are not correct because things have changed. So definitely pay attention to those corrections as you're going through the reading assignment. Because Jetpack has changed a few things, theming has changed a few things. The dark mode has changed a few things. There's a different pieces there. The other thing I would say, there is an article that's linked in the reading assignment, and I've linked it in a few of my comments, that links through the what we call the material design spec, which is kind of the way that you build Android apps. I would say that probably the most important information really in this chapter is in that design spec. So I do want to look at that a little bit here after we finish the slides, just kind of to show you where that's at, and some of the stuff that's in there, just because this may be more important than even some of the stuff that's in the reading assignment, is just kind of understand what buttons are available and when you should use those kind of button styles. Okay. So that's kind of the plan for today. So talk about user interaction in general. So users kind of expect to interact with your apps using touch in various gestures there. So if you're using a touchscreen, you're kind of expecting tapping, not per se click. I mean, I know we still call it the click event, but really it's tapping on the screen. And so sometimes there is a little bit of discrepancies in between what that means. Part of the reason the term click persists is because technically you can hook up a Bluetooth mouse to a Android device. Not many people use Android with a mouse. Technically you can. Technically you can use it with a mouse as you're using the emulators. But realistically, we typically think of those as taps. So taps, typing as you bring the soft keyboard up, various gestures, whether that be a double tap or a long press, things like that. And sometimes you may implement an interface that actually requires or uses talking, right? Use your voice if you're doing say text, voice to speech to text or something of that sort. So that can be an input mode as well, is voice. So in general, a button is anything that's going to perform an action. If you want something to occur, it should be a button. Now that's a little bit different from, say, a link. A lot of times people kind of confuse links and buttons and think, well, I can use either of those to do something, right? But the typical expectation is if it's a link, like it looks like an underlined link, then it should take you somewhere but not perform an action. So it would take you to a different screen. Versus a button in general is something that that does something. And now that gets a little bit obtuse because I still know that a bunch of people use buttons for navigation purposes. So sometimes those lines get blurred a little bit in terms of, what means what. But typically, if it is a that's one of the things that people try to hold to is kind of links are for navigation and buttons are for actions. So there are a variety of other UI elements that we'll get to as we'll kind of go through lesson 4. We've talked about some of them already for input, navigation, but buttons and images is kind of the topic for today. It's important as we're building up our UIs, and we're going to talk about a few different UI controls and ways to build UIs in lesson 4 and 5. But it's important to think about, how the users are going to expect your app to behave. So whatever you do, it should be, obvious about what's going to happen and where they need to click. It should be really easy to use, and the behavior should be consistent. One of those things that may seem like, well, a duh, there on that list is that it should be obvious. But in reality, that can be a hard thing to implement because sometimes what you as a developer think is obvious, it may or may not be obvious to the person that's using the app. So that generally requires a little bit of testing to at least kind of figure out what your user expectations are, and just listening to people using your apps to figure out what they expect to happen or where their gaps in expectations and in reality are. So you want to think about how they're going to use the app, what they're trying to do, and what are the main uses of that app, what order might they want to do things in. You got to think about steps and number of times they have to click on the screen, and what process do they have to actually go through to do their to get their workflow done. Because that can be with a small screen. You're talking about a 4-inch screen on the Nexus S. That can be really cumbersome if you don't think about the actual steps needed to complete a task, because it can easily blow up into a lot of different screens that you have to navigate to maybe do something simple like place an order. Okay. So you gotta kind of think about how your UI is arranged and how can you make it more efficient to get things done. The particular UI elements that you use, you want to make sure those are easy to access, easy to understand, easy to use. There's a lot of Android best practices as far as how to do that, and you really should pay attention to that, because a lot of that's kind of spelled out the user expectations. So if you follow the Android best practices, namely the material design guidelines, then more likely you're going to be in a place where what your app does or how it behaves is how the user expects it to behave, because that's how every other application works. So that's the biggest guiding point there, is the material design doc. So let's talk about buttons. Buttons in general are things that respond to clicking or tapping or pressing. Generally speaking, you're going to have either your text, you're going to have your image there to kind of tell the user what happens. It's important to kind of keep that text short because screen space is at a premium. So usually we try to keep that to one word as much as we can. One of the things from the material design spec is that you should avoid wrapping wherever possible. So keep that short, preferably one word. Keep it from falling onto a second line. But that oftentimes, again, you got to think about your apps as being translated. So let's say you want to translate it into Spanish. What might be nice and short in your language, in English, may or may not be short in another language. So sometimes you have to there's a little bit of give and take with the translations to try and figure out, maybe it's not an exact translation, but it's short enough to fit on the button. So sometimes there are cases where you say, well, we can't exactly translate that, but we'll do something close because screen space is at a premium. So with Android, it is possible to have buttons, as we've seen with just text. You can have buttons with just an icon, or you can have buttons with an icon plus text. Of those, generally an icon is the smallest, takes up the smallest amount of space. Text is kind of the next, and then larger still is the icon and the text. A lot of times what you'll find is is for maybe smaller devices, such as, a Nexus S with a 4-inch screen. You may only have space really to just have an icon. But as you scale up to, say, a 10-inch tablet, it may be more user-friendly to then do an icon plus text on larger devices. So that can be a factor for thinking about scaling. There's also some cases where an icon wouldn't really be clear because it's maybe a weird sort of action, and in that case, just having text would be fine. But any common action really, any common action that you're going to see in multiple apps, and there's kind of an understanding about what that should do, should probably have an icon if it's a common thing. Okay, such as you think your shocking part, you think about alarms. I'd say save is pretty common, even though the design spec for Android typically says that save does not have an icon, but there are things like that. Cancel, icon for that. So there are a bunch of different icons that are available in Android Studio. We've kind of looked at how to use some of those already with adding a launcher icon. But sometimes you need to add additional icons for, say, your buttons, like we're talking about here. So there's actually kind of two different ways to do that. One of those ways is you can go to the drawable folder, you can say new image asset. Another way you can do that is new vector asset. And I'm going to jump into Android Studio real quick just to show you where that is and where you can add them. So I've just got the guessing game app open right here. You don't need to follow along with this. I'm just showing you where the UI is for that. So on here, I'm going to right click on drawable. I'm going to say new. And then you'll see here there's an option for new image asset or a new vector asset. Everybody see that?
What's the difference between the two, image and vector?
So the difference is this: if you go to the vector asset, it only generates a vector version of the asset. You can kind of think of that as like an SVG. Versus if you go an image asset, then you get what we call a raster image or a PNG, right? So basically this gives you a PNG and this gives you an SVG file. The upside of vector images is they scale much better to different screen sizes because they don't contain the individual pixel data. They're directions for how to draw it. So those are much better in terms of scaling as well as file sizes. SVGs tend to be a lot smaller. So where possible, you generally want to go with the vector asset approach. That being said, older versions of Android do not support vector assets. So oftentimes for full compatibility, we have to go the image asset route to support both older devices and newer devices. Now, I believe that vector assets were introduced around 5.0, Android 5.0, which is our minimum for this course. So I think that I believe that the vector assets purely are supported on API 21. So you can probably go just that route as far as this is concerned. This course is concerned.
We could find out really quick, right?
We could find out pretty quick. Yeah. So if I just say I'm going to go vector asset, one of the things that is different is you do get a different interface, which depending on which way you go it. So you'll kind of see there's some naming conventions in here. You can pick click art, you can pick local file. Local file would be if you already have an SVG that you've designed. Clip art is for if you're using one of the many icons that are available. So I can stay on clip art. I'm going to go ahead and click on this button here. It's going to bring up this library. And in fact, we've kind of already seen this library before because it's the same one that we looked at when we made a launcher icon. So let's say I want this add icon here. So I might pick add. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll kind of see that it's already suggested a name for me. I don't usually keep the exact same name that they've given me, but you'll notice that it starts with the letters IC. Everybody see that? So IC is short for icon. So that's kind of the naming convention in Android. So what I would actually call this would be IC add. So it's the add icon. So that's what I would put there. Now you do have the option under color. You can kind of change the color of that icon before you create it. So by default, as you can see, it's going to create it as a black icon. But depending on the particular app that I'm creating, I might actually want that as a white icon. And those are basically the two different options, depending on what you're going to put it on top. So you might want to pick a white icon. You might want to pick a black icon. You could pick some other thing if that would be contrasting with the way the colors and other choices that you've made. I think here I'm going to just stick with that black for the moment. So I'm going to create just a simple black icon. You'll also notice that I can change the opacity here or the transparency, so I can have an icon that's fully opaque or partially transparent. Typically speaking, we're going to leave all of our icons as fully transparent because that will work the best as we actually pull it into the application. So usually I leave the rest as is, just pick an icon and give it a name. All right, so I'm going to hit next, and you'll remember we created this as a vector icon. So on the screen, it'll show you what files it's going to create, and notice the only file that it's creating is this icadd.xml. Everybody see that?
Yep. Is it best practice to just to kind of use the default set? Because you try to take something that's an actual image that you've taken with your phone, that just doesn't work out.
Oh no, that won't work.
It's so small, it just doesn't work.
No, anything you've taken with your phone would be too low resolution to use in an app. It's going to either be too high or too low. In realistically, to use an image in an app, you really have to get into Photoshop or Illustrator and pre-process it quite a bit. So SVG files, vectors would be ones that you would maybe draw with. There's two different applications out there that you can use. You can use Illustrator, can do vector drawing. There's another free kind of free program called Inkscape. Both of those can be used to generate SVGs. So if you were going to create a vector asset, you would use either Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape. In terms of raster images, so let's say you're taking photos, right, and maybe you want to get those photos into your application. In reality, you can't just bring in one version of that image. So let's say you want to have maybe a store for cars. You actually would need a bunch of different sizes of every car that you brought in. So you'd need something for high resolution, high DPI devices, medium DPI devices, low, extra high, etc. So you'd actually end up with 5 different versions of the same image, more than likely. So that's that's kind of a different story. Bringing in your own images takes quite a bit more work in Android, suffice it to say. Okay?
Yep.
So right now we're just starting with what's here. Okay. So if I look at what that did when I created a vector asset there, this is the only file that was added, right? So that's the part to remember. Is this, when I create a vector asset, just adds in this XML file. So I could potentially go back to let's say I want to go back to main here, although I probably should have picked let me create another icon because I didn't pick one that I can really use here. So I'm going to create another vector asset, and let's look for one that I can use as my reset button. So let's see, what would work good as, I think the sync icon maybe. Yeah, let's do that. So I'm going to pull this one. I'm going to call this IC refresh or reset, because that's where I'm going to use it. Now, actually, before I create this, I do need to take a quick look here. So if I'm looking at my UI here, if I want to put it on the reset button, what color do I probably want that icon to be? Given that it's going to be here with white text.
White.
I probably want it to be white, right? Okay, so if I create that, I'm going to go back to new vector asset. I'm going to pick the sync icon here. Okay, sync. I'm going to call this IC reset. And I'm going to create this, though, with a white color. There we go. Pure white. Next. Finish. Okay. So now that I've got an icon, I can add it to my button here. So I'm just going to go over on the right, and there's a little place for it, icon. And I'm going to click there, little mountain image, and this comes up. I can go ahead and hit OK. All right, so I've got my reset icon there. You'll notice. Yep.
I got a quick question.
Yep.
Is there a way to download the clip art from Font Awesome and then pull that in as an SVG or to?
The answer is no, and
Okay.
that would be easily a copyright violation if you were to do
okay.
that.
All right,
so
forget
please do not do that.
Okay, I thought the free icons were you could do that. But
just
doesn't
because
matter
it's free doesn't mean there's not copyright conditions. So when you're using it from their site, effectively, they're still kind of, and they basically end up getting credit. But if you were to download the images and make a copy of that yourself, you're no longer attributing where the icons came from. And you're not using them in a way that you necessarily have been granted permission to do so. So you have permission to use those on websites, but you don't necessarily have permission to use the Font Awesome icons on an app. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm with you.
So in terms of licensing, no, there's not a way to do that, and I would stay away from that because of licensing concerns. So I would use the icons that are there for the moment. So other things you can set padding in here right beneath, and so that kind of changes how much space is between the icon and the text, if I remember right. So I can bump that up to 16 or even 32, and you see there's a significant amount of space between there and there. So you can kind of play with that around if you need to, but usually the default of 8 dB is the right thing for really all screen sizes. So I usually just leave that alone. You'll also notice that there's a tint option here. So if I were to say create all my icons in white, I can still come down here and say I want this icon in this case to be maybe a green. I can still actually change that here. So that's one of the reasons you may want to actually create all your icons in white, is then you can tint them later using some of these interfaces. So I think the default that it went to there was black, but oftentimes creating all your icons in white is probably the thing you want. So you can kind of play with a few different things there to try and change how it looks. Either way, so we've got our vector asset. I'm going to go ahead and hit run on this application, and we should see it running there, except I need to switch it over to API 21 because right now it's on API 30. Oh, and it's trying to run my unit tests. I don't want to run my unit tests. I want to run the app. I want to run the app on the Nexus S API 21. Yeah, if I remember right, vector support was introduced in API 21. So from that purpose, because we're supporting 5.0 and above, I would just always create those icons as vector assets. Cool. If I do look at the other method here, new image asset, you can see there's kind of a different look to it, and you'll remember that we use this to create our launcher icon, which you can in fact see that this is already pre-selected. That creates a lot of different versions like this, and you do need all those versions if you're going to actually create an icon for your app. But if it's an icon that you're going to use on, say, a button, you actually don't need a lot of the resources that are here. So if you're creating an icon for just a button or things like that, you actually want to go down to action bar and tab icons, because that's going to create a smaller number of resources. Cool. Other things I can do in here. Let's say I go into, I'm going to just pick 360 there. So I might create this as IC 360. So you can see it's kind of a similar interface as it was with the other. But this exists purely to support older devices that don't know how to deal with vector images. So you can see that there's a few different themes you can pick from. Hollow Light will get you dark icons because they were meant to put on a light theme. Hollow Dark, on the other hand, will give you light icons, again, because it's meant to contrast with a dark theme. So if I want to kind of do the same thing I did the other way, I would pick Hollow Dark here. So we have an image there. And you can kind of see a preview. There's 5 different versions, right? So this is for any DPI. You've got extra high DPI, extra high DPI, high DPI. So it's actually creating 5 versions if I go through new image asset rather than just one XML file. Everybody see that? And if I were to preview it here on the next screen, you can see that it's going to create actually the one XML file and 5, it's these 4 PNGs. Everybody see that? So if you go through new image asset, you get a bunch of different PNGs at different sizes, plus the XML. But realistically, at this point, you just need to do the new vector asset. Cool? Questions? Am I the only one in the room?
Okay. No questions right now.
Good. Just checking. So yeah, 5.0, all you need to do is just create it as a vector asset. There's a few different ways then to hook up the Onclick. You can either use the Onclicklistener event listener, create that in your code, or you can hook it up via the XML using that Android Onclick. I would really say that the preferred way today, I'd say kind of modern best practices at this point, is really to use the XML wherever you can. There are cases where potentially you may need to use an Onclicklistener if it needs to be more dynamic, but that's not really in the space of what we're doing at the moment. What we're doing at the moment is going to be this. And there's, that being said, there also are some cases where in terms of dynamic code, sometimes this actually still, a lot of times this still actually works better, even if things are dynamic. So I would stress that this is generally the way that you want to do this. We'll go into this a little bit more in lesson 4.5 when we talk about the recycler view, and I'll talk more about your different options for talking about the on-click listener. And I think there's another lesson in lesson 4 where we'll delve into that a little bit more. But yeah, so this is usually the way I want you to hook it up. Okay. Now, in code, there are actually a few different ways to hook up listeners. If you do want to do it through code, you can do it by having the class implement that interface, which is good if you need to have a bunch of buttons that do the same thing or similar things. But a lot of times, in reality, most times, you don't want to have your buttons doing the same thing. Most of the times your buttons are all doing something else, something different. So in that case, there's a quicker way to implement that and have it kind of be what we call here, this is implementing an anonymous class. So inside this call to set on click listener, I'm providing it a click listener, which is what it's going to call when you click that button. This is as opposed to doing it this way. This here, I'm saying new view on click listener. Now this is kind of interesting because here, view on click listener, that is an interface. It's not actually a class. And if you remember right, interfaces we cannot typically say new with. Everybody remember that? Interfaces, abstract classes, you have to implement them. So you can't just say new thing. So this is kind of a way around it where we're defining, rather than creating a brand new file that implements this, we're kind of implementing the interface in line. So this defines what we call an anonymous class. So we're saying new view on click listener. So that's the kind of the wrapper around there. And then inside of that, we're actually defining the functions that implement that interface. So here, the on-click listener interface has just a single function. It's got the on-click, so that you can see it's public void, takes the view. And so basically in here, we would put the same logic that responds to clicking the button, just like you would put here. So this is kind of the old way of doing it. Back when I was doing this stuff professionally, we didn't have this option. So we did a lot of this, but I would definitely say that this is the preferred method with modern application development. So this exists. We'll talk a little bit about why you might want to do that in 4.5 when we talk about the recycler view. But other than that, this is typically the way you want to set it up. Okay, so in terms of making images, sometimes you may want to have that be clickable. Fair forewarning, if you're using a button, there are some animations that are built in to kind of give the user an idea that it's an indication that the click is happening or things like that. If you're using an image view, well, you don't get any animations out of the box. So it can be maybe a problem in terms of usability because it's oftentimes an image may or may not be obvious to the user that they can actually click on it or that it's going to do anything or that it's responding to their fingers. So we'll kind of, this lab will walk you through, using that image view, and we will make those clickable. But in reality, you do have to be kind of careful about just having strictly, clickable images because you're not signaling that they're buttons oftentimes. So image view is the general control you're going to use to show images. So if we have photographs, for instance, that we need to show, let's say you're doing real estate and you've got a bunch of images of the properties, or you're doing food, a restaurant's app, then you might want to have, different images of the food, of items that are on the menu or store, yada, yada. So the place that those images need to end up in is under res drawable. So we'll bring in these three apps that they provided. You've got the donut and the froyo and the ice cream sandwich. Those are available, and we'll bring those in. So in responding to on-click events with images is actually just the same as working with buttons. In reality, any control in Android can respond to an on-click event. So you can have an on-click on a text field, on an edit text. You can have an on-click on a button. You can have an on-click on an image. You really any of those controls can accept that way. Another kind of button that you'll run into is called the floating action button, or the FAB. And the idea is that it's kind of the difference with an FAB versus a regular button. Your regular button stays on the screen and you typically scrolls with the UI as it moves up and down. An FAB, on the other hand, is something that floats on top of your interface, right? So it's kind of fixed in position. Sometimes we'll fix it to the top right here. Sometimes we'll fix it down to the bottom right. Sometimes it'll be floating over the bottom center. There's a few different ways to approach that, but it's usually one of those three: top right, or bottom middle. The idea is kind of implied by the name that it's floating. The idea is that it's floating above your text and that it doesn't move as you scroll up and down. That's part of the idea, is an FAB doesn't move with the scroll. Okay? And that's what makes it different. Now, that's actually something you have to make sure that you implement your UI to be that way, because in reality, an FAB is just another control. And so you can anchor it and put it in your constraints just like you would a regular button. You just have to remember as you're setting it up to constrain it in such a way that it doesn't move. So the idea is that it's floating. And basically what we use that FAB for is to be the main primary action for that screen. So for instance, here you've got a contact list. Well, one of the common actions that you may want to do is add a new contact. So in this case, they're using the FAB with this little person plus icon to be that button to add a new contact. If you're dealing with a phone app, it might be the call button. If you're dealing with e-commerce where you're buying things, that may be your shopping cart button. So it can be a lot of different things. It's really just a button, so you can assign whatever you want to that. But the expectation in terms of material design and such is that it should be the quote unquote primary action for that screen. Okay? Questions on the FAB?
Yeah, you said that to work properly, you have to constrain it. I mean, you won't even be able to launch your app if you don't constrain it, right?
Well, what I mean is don't put it inside of the scroll view.
Oh, okay.
So, like if I have a scroll view, I put it inside of that scroll view, then just like everything else, it will scroll with the scroll view. Does that make sense? So I never want to put these inside of a scroll view. Okay?
Okay.
That's basically what I mean by that, is don't put it inside the scroll view. It should be floating above everything else. And it is important that it stays round, because that is kind of part of the user experience, is expecting it to be round, and that it shouldn't be square. I mean, obviously, it's a floating button. You can make it look however you want, but the typical expectation is that it's round, and basically it's always 56 by 56 dp, so that's roughly the size of a fingerprint, of a human fingerprint. So it's kind of got a fixed expectation for how big it's supposed to be, as well as kind of where it's supposed to be, etc., etc., etc. So there are a lot of expectations around that FAB to follow the zero material design specs.
If there's
Yep.
such a huge consensus for keeping that as
Mhm.
just a circle,
Yep.
why would there be extra options for other things then? Like, I mean, why would it kind of give us that freedom to do it if we're just kind of expected to use just that?
Those, suffice to say, making it not a circle takes work.
Okay, that's all I need to know then. That's all I need to know.
You can do it. It is not easy to do it, and the reason it's not easy is because you shouldn't do it.
Okay, simple enough.
So the way you bring that in, it used to be that it was this long path here: Android support, design, widget, floating action bar. And in the last week, I kind of talked about, there's some stuff that's happened with the support library that things have been moved around. So this path that's shown here is not the correct path to this. This is not the right way to get the floating action button in, because this is pointing to the old path. So the path that's shown here isn't the correct one. I have put the correct path to the FAB on the reading assignment for those of you that are interested in that. The good news is, though, the way that things work, if I remember right, adding in an FAB is actually pretty easy, because I believe you can simply drag and drop it on. Yeah. So right now, if I look at what's in my Gradle, right? So you can see that I've got the app compat, I've got material, I've got constraint layout. You see those three dependencies? So when you create a new project, those are already pulled in. And in fact, this second dependency here, com.google android material, that material design package is actually the one that contains the FAB. So there's actually nothing you have to bring in new to get it. And in fact, if you didn't have that one, as soon as you drag in the FAB, it will actually add that dependency. So realistically, all you've got to know for adding a floating action button, I just take it from the buttons area, drag it in. It'll ask me to maybe pick an icon, so I could pick the plus icon that I created previously, and then basically you just anchor it to the edges, just like any other control. So that's really all you have to do nowadays to add an FAB, is you just drag it from the toolbar and put it in. Cool? Questions?
Looks easy.
Yeah, it seems pretty easy considering they already have everything kind of added in.
Yeah. One of the things that we used to do is we used to kind of start with the basic activity to get some of these things set up, like the FAB. In reality, and partly because of different changes that have happened, and because the basic activity has changed, I think it's still better that you just start with the empty activity for these labs rather than the basic activity, and just pull in the FAB yourself. I think it's still better to start with empty activity than one of the other templates, just because basic activity has changed so much. So that's that. And so by default, the FAB will be 56 by 56. That's an important number, and that was a specially selected number. One of the things that you should keep, that that I would recommend you remember. So DP units, we've kind of mentioned them before. DP units are roughly, one DP is roughly 160th of an inch, okay? One DP is roughly 160th of an inch. So there's a correlation between DP units and inches, okay? Everybody with me there? Now, that should be familiar if you know how a point is defined. How is a point defined? Thinking back to CSS and such. Bueller?
I didn't really use them much, so I don't really remember how it's defined.
Okay. All right. So PT, or points, were actually is a unit that dates back to printers, actually the early days of the printing press. And so points are defined in terms of inches. So 1 point is 1/72th of an inch. So for instance, if you have 72 point, let's say I make a header in any word editor and I make that 72 point tall, I'm saying that that will now be 1 inch when I go to print it. Does that make sense? So in the Android world, 160 dp is roughly an inch. Okay? Everybody with me there? 160 dp is roughly an inch. Okay? And so because dp is defined in terms of inches, roughly, we can now correlate dp to physical elements, right? So one of the most important things for us to think about in terms of sizes is probably the size of your fingers. And so one of the numbers you need to remember, the human fingers are on average 50 dp. Human fingers are on average 50 dp. So if you want to have usability in your app, your buttons should typically be at least 50 dp by 50 dp. Does that make sense?
You mean the fingerprint, the part that touches the screen?
Just the fingerprint. So if you make it any smaller than 50 dp, then it can be harder to click on it. Or if you put things closer than 50 dp apart, then your users will have hard time. Some of your users will have a hard time kind of clicking on the right thing, tapping on the right thing. So the fact that the FAB out of the box by default is 56 by 56 is because of that it's supposed to be roughly the size of a fingerprint. Got it? So there is a minimum size. There is a mini size that's available here, which is 30 by 40. But I would recommend staying away from that because at that point you're getting buttons that are smaller than fingerprint size, and that can be a major usability and accessibility problem. So I would, although there is an option here to use FAB size mini, I would recommend you always stick with FAB size normal. That's basically the right size for every occasion. Okay. There are a lot of common gestures that you may find in mobile apps, whether this be an iOS app or whether it be an Android app or whether it be whether it's even a Windows app or whatever it may be. There's a few different gestures that you can support in Android, and again, you can support these in pretty much any mobile operating system. One of those is long touch, commonly known as long press. So a tap you typically just do by putting your finger on it and releasing. A long press is putting your finger on the button and kind of holding it for, I think, 2 or 3 seconds, something of that sort. So you press it there, hold it, and then release it. That would be what was considered a long touch or a long press. Double tap, if you're going to quickly tap it twice, that would be considered another gesture. Those can be used with a variety of controls. There's also the fling gesture. The fling gesture is where you swipe up, down, left, or right, but it's where you kind of release with momentum. So you're moving, maybe you're scrolling down a long list, you swipe down, but then you pull your finger off the screen before you stop moving it. So that kind of gives it some momentum. So a lot of people use that fling gesture to move up and down very quickly in long lists. Okay, so you'll see that a lot of times if you have a list, is that fling gesture. Drag is very similar. It's where you put your finger on the screen and you kind of slowly move it up and down. But the difference is with a drag, you pull it off the screen when it's not moving, which means that the the screen doesn't continue moving. So a fling is you release it and it continues with momentum, versus drag, it doesn't continue with momentum. Okay. Scroll, similar kind of thing. Now scroll is you might see it with some devices. You might see it as 2-finger scroll if you think about like a touchpad on your laptop. Pinch would be your zoom in and zoom out. So all of those different gestures are available, but you do have to be careful with these gestures, in the sense that, remember, kind of going back to the first thing that we said, your UI should be obvious, okay? So sometimes these gestures may be obvious. It may be perfectly fine to use them. Other times it's not. So some of the gestures on the list, I would say, are generally ones that you would avoid. So namely the top two, the long press and the double tap. The reason I would say avoid those most of the time is because they're not something that users generally expect. Users generally don't expect that a long press does something different than a regular tap, and they don't expect a double tap to do something different than a tap. Does that make sense? Kind of maybe line up with some of your own experiences. So those are there, the long press and the double tap are there, but I would really strongly advise you don't put anything there unless it's intended for users that are, maybe experienced power users. The things that we typically put under a long press are for those users that, maybe have been using our app several years, and they kind of, they need a faster way to do something, if that makes sense. Right. So one of the things that people make, sometimes Android developers make the mistake in, is they put normal functionality under a long press, and then the long press is the only way to get to that functionality. That's the biggest thing you want to avoid. Anything that you implement as available through a long press or double tap should be available some other way. It just may take more steps. Does that make sense? So those are available. In order to detect and work with those gestures, the class that you use is called the Gesture Detector, and specifically we typically use Gesture Detector Compat. So that supports all different versions of Android, because there are some differences with how gestures work from one version of Android to another. So we typically use that Compat library there. That's actually as far as actually supporting gestures and working with the gesture detector, the lab does not cover that, and honestly I think it's kind of over and above as far as what we can do here in an introductory course. So on the one hand, I think there's some really, really cool stuff you can do with gestures, and if you want to make an app that's really snazzy, like gestures is a thing that you should know, but they're really beyond the scope of what we can adequately cover in this course. So I'll mention that they're there, but we won't actually do. I'm going to say that there won't actually be a lab or a test over these gestures. So that's available there. It's good to know about those and know that they're available. And as you're building more advanced apps, there are things to consider. But I would stress that probably the only gesture that you want to deal with at this point is just going to be to understand the tap gesture, which you can handle with Onclick. Okay?
Yep.
All right. So let's jump into the code lab. And we might want to take a quick break here before we do that. So just kind of, here's the plan for today. This is the lab that we're building for 4.1. It's called Droid Cafe. As it turns out, this one that we're building for this Droid Cafe is actually one that we'll continue adding on to throughout the rest of lesson 4. So a lot of the labs, all the labs from 4.1 through 4.4 involve additions to this project. Okay, so make sure that you follow along. Make sure you get this in here. Make sure you stay up to pace because we're going to be building on top of it. One of the things that it asks in a few different coding challenges and homeworks is to make a copy of it and rename it. I would ask that you just keep it named Droid Cafe. Don't make a copy of it. And so there's like a Droid challenge and a Droid Cafe challenge and a Droid Cafe input, etc. I would just keep it consistently called Droid Cafe throughout this. Okay. So we'll end up.
Do you want us to copy it to a new folder or just
Copy it to new folder. So there'll be a Droid Cafe in 4.1. There'll be a Droid Cafe in 4.2. There'll be a Droid Cafe in 4.3 and a Droid Cafe in 4.4. I just ask you just keep calling it Droid Cafe. But yeah, you'll have one in the different folders. Okay.
All right.
All right. So let's take a break. And let's call it maybe a 20-minute break. Come back at 1:57. And we'll jump into the lab at that point.
I guess this is just a zip file. Examples 4.4.
Let's see. Are you looking at task 1?
No, I need to get to there real quick. I clicked on the code labs and it was just like a zip folder.
Oh. Are you looking on Inside Ranken?
Yeah, I was on Inside Ranken.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm curious what's up there. What's up there might be stale leftover from last year. Let me check it real quick. Yeah, you don't need that. I don't exactly remember what was in there, but yeah. That's examples 44 is that was something from last year.
All right.
I'm gonna rip that off of there. We will need to get some images for this project, and let me see where are those available. Yeah, so that's what we'll want. I think I have that pulled down already. Android Fundamentals, Apps version 2. This is under Droid Cafe, App, Source, Main, Res, Drawable. Okay. So there are the images for this lab. How's everybody doing?
I'm all right.
How you feel about Android at the moment so far?
It's interesting. I mean, we haven't gotten too far into it, but it's not too hard to use. So
I will say there's a lot of quirks, right? And in some sense, it's it's mobile apps are in a lot of ways is very similar to building desktop apps, but there's definitely a lot of gotchas to the Android platform.
I think it's more of like problems with learning Java quirks than Android quirks for me.
Yeah. Java has a lot of quirks. I agree with you on that front. Java has a lot of quirks. So. Java was kind of my go-to language in high school and through college, as far as like personal projects. But nowadays, I'm like, ooh, Java. It's kind of one thing where you tolerate the quirks when it's the language and then when you learn about other things, you're like, oh, why do I have to deal with all this weirdness? But anyway. We'll get started back in about 3 minutes here. All right, so let's get back to it. All right, so the plan for the rest of today's session is we'll go through this Droid Cafe project, and we're going to build that together. And I would strongly ask that you code along with this, so that we're kind of all at the same place for the rest of the next few weeks, so you kind of have the same foundation. Okay. So we're going to create a brand new project in Android Studio. And so you'll remember that I just gave you a new link to a new repo, which hopefully you've closed down, because we're going to use that now. So I'm going to hop over to Unit 2. Actually, I need to say close this project and create a new one. Create new project. There we go. So I want to say empty activity. That's where we're going to start. The folder where I want to start is here. So Unit 2, and then I'm going to go under 4.1 because that's where we're at right now. I'm going to go change the application name to Droid Cafe. And put that under the folder Droid Cafe. So your folder should look something like that. Should be Android Labs 2.0, your student name, 4.1, Droid Cafe. So that's where we want to create this project. Okay? Take a quick snip of all those settings. And so when we get that project created, we'll move on to starting to build it out. You'll also need those 3 images that I posted in Discord. So there's one for the donut, the ice cream sandwich, and Froyo. If you kind of remember different versions of Android, that's part of where that comes in as kind of an inside joke. Because those are 3 different versions of Android. But those images are on Discord. You want to pull those down, and then we'll add them to the project here in a minute.
Do you want us to save them into the folder that we're creating?
Just save them into your downloads here a minute.
Okay.
And then I'll show you how to get them into the project. So just get them into your downloads folder first.
So just download them. We don't have to worry about putting them in our drawable yet or anything.
Yeah, don't worry about putting them in the drawable yet. You basically can drag them, drop them in. All you need to do is get them into your downloads folder right now.
Okay, I got you.
We'll drag them in together so you can kind of see how I would do that. It's the catch is it's a little bit hard to navigate there just using the file system to get them into the right place. So the way I do that is kind of to drag and drop with Android Studio. We're waiting on 2 people still. Hey, Jonathan, are you there? Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay. All right. So once you've got that pulled down, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the drawable folder, open it up here in Android Studio. And the kind of easiest way to get these resources in there is then to just drag them in like that. Now, when it pulls in here, you'll see it's kind of asking me what folder to put it in. And in fact, it's asking me for drawable V24. Everybody see that on my screen?
Yep.
I don't actually want it to go into that folder. If it goes into that folder, then they're only usable on version 24 or higher. So I'm actually going to remove that V24 from the end and say I just want this to go directly into drawable. There we go. Okay. Ask me about adding them. I'll say yes. So that's where they should have ended up. And you'll notice that I don't have that V24 at the end.
Wait,
So,
how do you do that again? I think I missed.
So I just pulled it basically from my downloads folder in File Explorer and dragged them in. So I took them from my downloads folder and dragged them into the repo. Sorry, into the drawable folder here. Does that help, Zach?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. The only reason I do it that way is it's just sometimes it's hard to navigate the folder structure down to actually where it is, because the folder structure on disk, if you'll remember right, is not what it shows in Android Studio. That also makes sure that the Android Studio gets to do its checks as far as bringing the resources in. Now, one of the things to note as we're working with these resources, we will be using the name of the file without the extension. Anytime you have an identifier or a file that you bring in, whether it be the layouts that we've already worked with, activity main, etc., you're always dealing with the thing as without its extension, not with. Another thing that's worth noting in there, these images have already been named properly. The names of all your resources need to be valid Java identifiers, which means that the only characters that they can contain are letters, numbers, and underscores. Those are the only valid characters in an image file. Nothing else. You can't put spaces, you can't put dashes, just letters, numbers, and underscores. Other rules as far as that's concerned, the name of the file cannot start with a number because identifiers in Java cannot start with numbers. So I can't call it like 12 monkeys. I could call it monkeys 12, but not 12 monkeys. It can't start with a number. Okay? So if you're finding images online to bring into your own application, you will probably have to rename those images as you bring them in. Okay? In fact, the fact that the naming is so important that let's say I rename this, and you don't need to do this. I'm gonna do this real quick just for illustration purposes. Let's say I had called this donut space circle instead of donut underscore circle. Now, as soon as I do that, notice it says space is not a valid resource character name. So it actually won't even let me do it directly here because it's trying to prevent you from doing that. Now, if I had brought these files in from disk, so for instance, if I was manipulating these in the File Explorer, I could easily have ended up with names in there like that where it's donut circle. So you'll notice with that space in there, you see how it's got that red underline? So there's an error there. And in fact, if I were to leave that as is, and I try to run my application, actually I'm on the wrong emulator. I want to go to my Nexus S. If I try to run that with a space in there, you'll actually get an error when you try to build your application, and you see how it says space is not a valid file-based resource, yada, yada, yada. So your app will completely stop building if you have any files that are invalid names. Okay? Questions? Any questions on naming files?
Nope.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to donut underscore circle so my app works. So that's a common thing that students run into is you bring in a file and then your whole app breaks because the name's wrong. All right. So that's cool. So we've got the app working, and so our goal is to get to this, right? So this is what we're trying to build. And in fact, you may notice that there's a dot, dot, dot in the upper right corner. That's for a later lesson. That's where we're going to put the menu. We won't touch on that today, but that's kind of what you're seeing up there in the top corner. Okay. So as far as that's concerned, you know, where's probably the good place to start now that we've have the images brought in, we've got our project started. What should we probably do next?
Well, delete the text view of Hello World.
That sounds good. Okay, so beep, deleted. What else?
I guess we should also set it to an 8 dp for our margins too.
Sounds good. Remember, I usually want to go and turn on the system UI so I can see that too. Okay, so now we can kind of start just dropping in the controls, right? So if I look at the layout that I'm targeting, I know that the top needs to be a text view. So I'm going to drop in a text view there. And I'm going to drop in some text views for the text of each of those three items. So I've got a few text views. You saw that where I grabbed that button remember the button was under buttons. I'm going to go floating action button, bring that in. Now, when I try to bring the floating action button in here, you see it's asking me for an image, because the kind of standard expectation is your floating action button is an image and not text. Well, I've got a problem. I don't have an image yet. So before I can actually put the FAB on there, I do need to create an icon for that. Okay, so I'll come back to that. So we've got our text views. What else do we need to add in here?
Our images.
Our images. Okay, so if we look on the left, if I go back up to common, you'll see that there's the image view control. Okay, so that's what we use to actually put the images into the application. I'm going to drag that in here. Boop, like that. And so the top one is going to be donut circle. So I'm going to pick that here. And I'm going to just drag in the other two and pick those like so. So you should have something like this without any sort of constraints as of yet. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and just create that icon, right? So in order to create the shopping cart icon, I'm going to right click on drawable. Remember, we kind of went through this in lecture, in the theory portion. You want to go to new vector asset. Okay. And I'm going to pick the shopping cart from here, and I can search for that like so. So I'm going to search for shopping cart. We can see that if we're going to put this on a lightly colored button, that then I need to have this be a lightly colored icon. So I'm just going to ramp that up here so I get a white icon. And that's what I want there. So I'm going to call this IC cart. And so I'm doing that as a vector asset, which means I'll only get the vector, the XML file out of this. Everybody got that? Any questions on creating the icon?
Nope.
Okay, cool. So we're going to hit next here, finish, add that in. So you should see that there's the IC cart XML under your drawable folder now. Okay, so now that I've got my icon, I can actually put my floating action button in, drag that in, and pick IC cart. Okay. And then once we've got all those controls, probably the next thing to do would be to just anchor them, to add in the appropriate constraints. Okay.
Mr. Smith, did you tint that? My button's white, the floating action button.
I made mine. I did make this white. As soon as I brought the floating action button, that's just the colors it came in with for mine.
I just got it's actually a square. It's a floating action button.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry.
Oh no.
Are you sure you went to buttons and went to floating action button?
Yeah, I went to floating action button.
When you created the icon, how did you create the icon? Did you go to new vector asset or new image asset?
Vector.
Okay. Then I'm not entirely sure why you got a square button instead of a circular button. Maybe we can troubleshoot that after lecture.
Yeah, sure.
Because it'll still work if it's square, but ideally it should be rounded. So anyway, so that's my button, and I want to now add in my constraints. So I'm actually going to switch over to the blueprint view because I think it's kind of easier to see the constraints here. So if we think about how we want to constrain things, this text I want anchored to the top side. So I'm kind of going to work my way from the outside in, anchor that here, and that's going to be centered. So I'm going to anchor that to the left and right. And I accidentally resized that, so I need to get these back to wrap content and wrap content. Okay, so I'm going to set both of those to wrap content, and then I'm going to constrain this down to the bottom and right edges there. Now I may want to have this a little bit farther, so maybe I'm going to give this a 16 and a 16 away from those edges. And then I kind of want to work my way from top down from there. So up here, we've got the image. I've got my text view. You know, which one should we anchor first? Well, we should probably anchor the image, I would say, first. So because the size of this text is going to depend on the size of the image. Does that make sense? I want the size of the image to have kind of first choice of space. Okay, so I'm going to anchor that to the top underneath the text view, anchor this to the left edge, anchor that to the bottom of there, up here, over to the left, and then I'll kind of anchor this similarly and anchor that there. You'll notice that these three labels I won't have. Actually, I want to have the top of this to the top of the image there. Yeah. And I probably want the bottom of that here. Yeah, that's what I want. So I'm going to anchor the top of the text view to the top of the image and the bottom of the text view to the bottom of the image. And effectively what that's going to do is it's going to keep the text centered with the image. Center aligned with the image. Boop. That it goes with. And I think I maybe need some more margin there. So I think actually I'm going to make most of these 16. Because I don't think I have enough spacing here. 16, 16, 16, 16. And so 16 here, 16 there, 16 here, 16 there. Any questions on how I did that layout?
Nope.
Okay. Does that kind of make sense? So the big key there is I work from kind of the outside edges in.
Is there a reason I'm not seeing all of the constraints in the design or in the blueprint layout?
Yes, possibly. I have here checked show all constraints.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you don't have that checked, then it would just be showing the constraint for the thing you have selected. So you should have something like that. Now, another thing I might want to do, I do need to go back and first of all set the widths and heights of all these things. So all of the text views should be wrap content if they're not already. Wrap content for both their width and height. Same for the FAB should be wrap content. But for the images we want them to be square. If we use wrap content, then it will basically make the images the same size as the original image, which is okay if your images are roughly what you want them to be already. But a lot of times you'll have images that are maybe out of the box, they're too big or too small. So we may need to adjust them. Another thing I might want to do is constrain their kind of aspect ratios because these images need to be square. So one of the constraints that you can add, and this is oftentimes used with images, is to add an aspect ratio constraint. Now, I think that they've moved it because I'm not seeing that constraint anymore. It used to be on that corner. So where do I get to that aspect ratio constraint, or is it just no longer a thing?
There's an add a set of constraints underneath helpers, if that may be it.
Underneath helpers? Oh.
No, whenever you right-clicked.
Right-clicked, helpers.
Yeah, it said add set of constraints. I didn't know if
Yeah,
that was...
that's not the one I want. I wonder if maybe they've removed it. I think they might have removed it, because I do know that it was sometimes problematic. Okay, so we'll forget that that's there. All right, so I can leave these as just wrap content, or I think I'm gonna change them though to be a different height. I'm gonna go back to design view so I can see this as I'm working with it. So I think what I want is I want these to be 100, maybe 150. There, yeah. So I'm going to make these all three of these images 150 by 150. So I'm going to select them all and set their width and their height to 150. Okay. So other things I probably want to do is now that we've got those things in, I want to set the text for each of those. So let me go through those kind of in order. We can see droid desserts is the text that's on the top. So I'm going to change that here. Droid desserts. And then I'm just going to pull in the text that's shown on the mockup. So donuts are glazed and sprinkled with candy. And I don't know how my screen resolution's coming in, so if you need to see a better view of the text that's there, definitely pull up the lab. Ice cream sandwiches. Have chocolate wafers and vanilla filling. And froyo is premium self-serve frozen yogurt. So get that text in there. Now, you may notice as I kind of type that in, and you probably have the same problem, that the text is kind of running off the screen as well as running behind the image.
Can you fix that by setting the width to match constraint?
Yes, exactly. That's how I'm going to fix that. So I'm going to go to each of those, and I'm going to set the width of that to match constraint. Go back to the design view. There. And so it's the height is wrap content, but the width is match constraint. Problem solved.
Mr. Smith, how'd you make it 150 dp again? I think I changed the wrong thing.
I just went to each of them and changed that to 150 dp.
Okay.
I just typed it in. How's everybody coming along?
Got it.
Okay. Anything left that we need to do on the screen before we leave?
We have to.
Desserts needs to be formatted.
The what?
Joy desserts needs to be bigger and bold.
Okay. So let's go down and look at that. The way I would probably want to do that is change the text appearance first of all. So I might say display 1 to, no, maybe back to display 1. So maybe make that display 1 and bold.
We also need to set the IDs for all of the views.
Yep, we need to remember to do that. I also need to change the colors of my FAB because I might want to make sure that that icon is say white. So I'm going to quickly change that. If I go here to the FAB, where's my icon? So I've got my, why is my icon? There's my icon up here. Source compat is where it's showing. And then the tint of that, I want that to be white. Exactly white. Although that seems to not have changed it. So why? Huh, interesting. I created a white icon, but it came in as black. And I've got a background tint here, but that's not the color I want. That's not what I want to change. Oh well, I may have to come back to that later. It may be bugging out. Okay, so the icons kind of working my way from the top to the IDs working my way from the top to bottom. We've got kind of the top is kind of the title. So maybe I'll call that title text. Maybe move the images around a little bit to reorganize this so the tab order's right. There we go. So image text view, image text view. So this would be the donut image. This would be the donut text. This would be the ice cream. Maybe ice cream sandwich. Image. Yep, and this is the ice cream sandwich text. We've got the froyo image. And the froyo text. And maybe I'll just call this one cart. Or, yeah, cart FAB. Okay, so all my IDs are set. Anything else?
We also need to string resource all the strings.
Yep. You'll see there's all the exclamation marks on all of these, and that's because we haven't extracted that yet. There's some other things there too, but that's one of the things we need to do. So in here, I'm going to just go through these, and I'm going to say Alt-Enter. And so I'm going to extract that as title text, and because I typically use the name of the control there instead of the actual text that's there. Donut text. And we've got the ice cream sandwich text. And I actually misspelled that. Extract same resource. I'm going to call that ice cream sandwich text. And this would be Froyo text. Okay. Going back to the design view real quick to fix my typo. Factor. And there. Sandwich fixed. Type spelling error. So those are the things that I have in my now chocolate. Yep. So that's what I have in my string resources now.
Looks like we got to add a menu on there too.
Yeah, so there's a menu that you're kind of seeing here. We'll do that in a later lesson. So we're not going to do that today. I feel like that's 4.3 is where we're going to add that menu. So that'll be next week. Okay. So I would actually, because we've kind of got the layout here, I would first just do a quick test just to make sure that everything's working correctly in the emulator or your physical device. Now, if I run this on the Nexus S, we kind of see, hey, I've got a problem, right? You see how my Froyo is actually going off screen?
Yeah.
So I've got a little bit of a problem there because my images are too big. And partly that's my fault because I pushed them up to 150, but I was testing them on the Pixel, right? So if I'd gone and maybe put this into generic phones 4-inch, maybe I would have seen that before we made that mistake. Okay. Well, so what are my options to fix that problem?
Make it scroll.
Okay, so we could make it scroll. That's one option.
Make the images smaller.
Make the images smaller. Okay. I'm going to go for the moment. Let's take the easy approach. I'm going to select the 3 images and just go maybe to 100 dp by 100 dp. And that should get everything back on screen. So. Okay, so we've got a working layout. I would go ahead and just check this code in, push it up to GitHub so that we have, it's saved at that point in time. You basically, as soon as you've got a stable layout, that's a great time to back up your work. So I'm going to go ahead and check that in with all the unversion files and such. And so this would be Droid Cafe layout, and I'm going to commit and push that there before we move on to the back end of it. Okay. So now to kind of think about, as you're doing that, what we're going to do, what we're going to make this app do for this lesson here. One of the things we want to make it do is we're going to have it show a toast whenever you click on one of the items, right? So if you click on the donut, we're going to show a message. We're going to show ice cream sandwich here, or we're going to show that. And that's basically going to, quote unquote, add it to your cart. And then when you click the shopping cart, you're going to see what's in your cart. Okay?
So we're going to add an on donut event handler?
Yep. So we need to add a event handler for each of those. So I'm going to go over to the code view. And so up here under the image view, I'm going to say Android on click. And yeah, that sounds fine. So we'll do on donut.
That's hilarious.
And I'll add a handler there. So on donut, we'll have on sandwich. And I'll add on froyo. I'll enter. There we go. And finally, for the button, I'm going to add an on-click there as well. And so we're going to say on order for that one. So I've got 4 different handlers for each of the one for each image and one for the floating action button. Okay. So in here, I want to say that each of these are going to show a toast anytime you click on it, so we can see, well, what did you order? So under on donut, I might say toast dot make text. And so remember, the first argument to that is our context, which is going to be this. The next thing is the string to show. So I might say, let's see, you order, or maybe donut added to cart. Maybe show that for short. So toast dot length short. And then finally, I gotta remember to say show. And I'm basically going to add that same line for my sandwich and my froyo. I'm just going to say here, I'm going to say ice cream sandwich added to cart. And here I would say froyo added to cart. And maybe I follow the naming that we had in the UI. So far, so good, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we should be able to test that real quick just to make sure that those things are operating as we expect them to. So click that one, donut added to cart, ice cream sandwich added to cart, and froyo added to cart. Great. Okay. So remember that I usually don't want to have hard-coded strings here, right? So what can I do? What do I need to do here to make sure that that string is not hard-coded?
String resource.
Okay. And how do I get to that? What button combination do I want?
Alt enter.
Alt enter. Correct. Okay. So we're going to say, I want to extract that. So alt enter here, extract string resource. And so if I'm saying Froyo added a cart, what might be a good name for for this message here? Kind of think about the context of it.
Added Froyo.
Okay, so you said added Froyo. What was somebody else said something?
Add cart Froyo.
Okay, both of those are legitimately could be done. Both of those are fine. One thing I would do though is typically if I'm gonna put this in a toast, I typically start that with the word toast. So here I might say toast, add cart Froyo, if that makes sense. Just to give a hint to the translator that that's where that text is being used, that it's being used in a text message. And not, say, on a button or something like that. So I would extract that, toast, add cart, Froyo, and here extract resource, toast, add cart, sandwich, and alt enter, extract resource, toast, add cart, donut.
Mr. Smith?
Yep.
I have this problem with my Nexus S API 30 emulator where it won't show toasts, but my other 3 emulators and my physical device do, so I know it's not a problem with my code.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure what would be causing that. Are you sure that you're saying show at the end?
Yeah, I am, and
Okay.
I've had this problem with other applications too, and I just sort of usage of
Why don't
one.
you try toast length long and see if it shows up with a long length instead of a short length?
Okay.
It's possible that it's running slow enough that it's going away before you can see it. And so a length long would show if that's the case.
Erratic behavior. There, I entered the string resource for. I have exactly what you do, and I got a red line up there at the top. Why is that?
It's a bug in Android Studio.
Okay.
If you kind of watched as I was adding it, after I added Froyo, it had a red line on that one. After I added Sandwich, it had a red line on that. After I added Donut, it had a red line on that. But it went away every time I added a new one. So it's a bug in Android Studio. And really all you got to do to make that line go away is just go up to the build menu and say rebuild project. And so once the build finishes, it'll go away. Or should. And it looks like it didn't go away for me. So sometimes I just have to run the app to make it go away, which is still not going away, even though it's fixed there. So
try it again. It'll go away.
Like usually it goes away when I run.
I actually had to physically hit the stop button over there and then start it again.
Yeah. Still not going away. Yeah, that's okay. Well, close the file and reopen it. Fixed it. So usually it goes away when I build it, but sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so that's what we should have here. Huh?
That's the solution. Close the file and open it again.
Close the file and open again, if all else fails. All right, so we've got our start there, for having the toast appear. The next thing I want to do is actually implement the order screen. So my goal is that when we click on the FAB, it should take me to another screen, which will show me all the stuff I've ordered, right? So that's our goal, right? Where should we start if that's our goal? What's maybe the first thing we should do now?
Create a second activity.
Create a second activity. Okay. What should I call that activity, given that I want it to show my order?
Order activity.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. So one of the things I pointed this out to a few students already is typically we don't call that second activity. So we usually name it based on what you're going to do on that screen. So in this case, I'm going to call that the order activity. So I'll create a new activity, call that order activity. It'll come in here as activity order as the layout name. And I'm going to hit finish. Okay. So this, looking at the layout, right? So remember, my goal is to show all of the things that you've added to your cart. What do I need to put onto this screen in order to be able to do that? And right now I'm not thinking about prices. I don't need to show the amount or the quantity. I just want to show what I've ordered, right? So maybe the easiest way to approach that problem is just say, well, we'll just add a text view. And maybe in reality, maybe I'll plan ahead a little bit. We'll add a scroll view, and then I'll add a text view inside of that. And in fact, I don't need my linear layout here. I just want a scroll view directly in there. So I've got constraint layout, I've got a scroll view, and then I've got a text view directly underneath that. So I'm going to add some constraints around the scroll view, all four sides there. I might give this an ID of scroll or order scroll view. And I might call this order text. Okay, so I got a place to put the order information. Now, I might want to put a little bit of padding on that text view so that it's not all the way up to the edge. So I'm going to scroll down to padding here. And I'm going to set a padding of 16 dp on all sides. All right. Everybody got that second layout now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still saying text view here. I'm going to remove that here and put my cart under the second one where it has the gear. Okay. So we're done with the layout as far as this screen is concerned. That's all that needs to be on the screen. It's just a text view inside of a scroll view. Okay. So thinking about the order activity, right? So if I want to show my order contents in this text view, what does the order activity need to receive as far as its data?
A list of items that you added.
Okay, so I could take a list of items. What's another way that I could do that? Because there's actually 3 ways I can solve this problem right now to do this.
Take the individual items based on the click.
Okay. But I'm thinking about data type. So you said a list of things. What's another option? Remember, one of the things I need to do is I need to pass that data over as an extra, right? So if I'm going to send it from one activity to another activity, I need to send it as an extra in the intent, right? So what are my options there?
Maybe just a single string.
Just a single string. That would actually work for our purposes. Are there any other options? maybe I could send it over as an array.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So I could either send it over as a list of strings, I could send it over as an array of strings, I could send it over as a single string. I think the way I'm going to approach it this time around is send it over as an array of strings. And that's how I'm going to read it in. Now, in order to have a reference and update the text view, I do need to get that first. So private text view. Oh, that brought in text, not the thing I wanted to. I don't need the org w3c DOM because I'm not doing anything with XML. Text view, this would be my order text. And so remember, I need to do a find view by ID to pull that in. Find view by ID. So r.id dot order text. Okay, so we've got that. And then I want to pull in the stuff from the intent, right? So obviously I'm not sending the intent yet. We'll kind of work our way backwards, right? So we'll put in the code to accept the intent, and then we'll work our way back to actually sending it, right? So what's the first thing I need to do here if I want to read data out of the intent that we've received?
You have to get the intent.
Okay, so I have to get the intent. So, and I probably need to save it to a variable. So let's say intent, and that is get intent. Okay, so that's first line of code. And then I want to pull out the values that we've received. So in here, I might want to say intent dot get extra. But you know, as we said, I think the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to do this as a array of strings. So I'm going to say get string array extra. And so maybe I'll call the name of that is going to be items. Now, remember that I'm going to need to put this same text over in the main activity. So rather than duplicating that both places, I'm going to go ahead and make a constant for it. So up top, I'm going to say public static final. So remember, your constants do need to be marked both static and final. Public static final string. And this would be extra items. Okay, so that's my constant. And so I'm going to use that constant both here and back in main activity when I actually send this intent. Everybody with me there?
Yep.
Now, I've asked for this string array. I haven't saved it to a variable, so I need to fix that. So string array items is equal to intent get string array extra. And then basically all I need to do from that point is just to loop through the items and put that text into my text view. Okay. Now, one of the things I could do, basically, the thing I want to end up doing is I'm going to concatenate each of these lines together that I'm going to receive. And I'm going to put a /n between each line. So in that sort of sense, I need a kind of way to store that result as I'm working through it. So I could have that be just a string result, and maybe start that as empty string, right? And concatenate to that. And that would work. It just wouldn't be very efficient. So does everybody remember what I need to use there to kind of efficiently concatenate and build something up, build a string up? What should you use there?
String builder.
String builder, right. So I'm going to use a string builder instead of just a string. And that's going to be my result that I'm going to build up. So rather than saying empty string there, I'm going to say new string builder. So we're going to basically start with an empty string builder. And so once I've got that there, now we can finally loop through the items. So let's just do a simple counted loop. So for I is equal to 0, I is less than items dot length plus I, loop through each of the items. And so as I go through each item, I'm going to add that to my result. So I'm going to say result dot append items I, and maybe after that, then I'm going to append a single new line. So for each item that we get, I'll put that into the string builder, and then also append a /n. Okay, and then once that's all done, we can finally update the text view with all that text. So I'd say order text dot set text is equal to, there I just need to put result. Any questions? That kind of makes sense using the string builder there.
Yeah, I got a question. I don't know how to reproduce it here, but I had integers show up. I tried to do something like this with string builder yesterday, and I just couldn't help but get numbers, so I abandoned string builder. What was I doing wrong?
You probably were not properly converting the number to a string, is my guess.
Okay, what was that number I was getting? Just the place in memory?
I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look at it.
Okay, all right.
It was probably a string resource, because remember, anytime you do, if you have like r.string. Like if I have back in main activity, r.string.toast add cart, this is an integer. This is not the actual string. Does that make sense? Like that is actually a resource ID. It's not the string. So if you want to get the actual string, you have to say get string and pass that in.
What would you get if you put r.id? Would you get a number there for whatever toast add cart?
Yeah, you would just get the number. You would just get the resource number.
I think that's what I did. I just used ID.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's what I'm gonna do to kind of build up the results and then display it. Okay.
Mr. Smith?
Yep.
Do you not need to call to string on the string builder?
I don't, actually. I don't. And because normally you do. You're right in asking the sense that normally when you're working with string builders, you do. But remember that set text, see what set text takes. See, set text takes a char sequence, right?
And that's what a string builder is.
Yes. Both a string and a string builder and an editable, both a string and a string builder, are both implement that char sequence interface. So I don't actually need to do a conversion, because the conversion, when it goes to actually set it, it's already going to convert it to something else. So set text takes a char sequence. It doesn't actually take a string, which is why it's okay to just put a string builder directly to it. And in fact, anytime you call to string, that makes a copy of all the text that's inside of there. So actually, by not calling to string, I'm avoiding a copy. Does that follow?
Yeah.
Because it's already doing a copy. All right. So that's all we need to do in terms of main activity. Let's go back to on order and maybe check real quick that that's working. So I'm going to create an intent. And maybe here I say new intent. You can remember, because this activity is part of our app, I'm going to use an explicit intent. So I'm going to say the context, which is this, and then order activity dot class. And you remember that it needs an extra. So I'm going to say intent dot put extra. I want to use order activity dot extra items. That's the constant we defined. And then the actual value of that, temporarily at least here, I'm going to create a string array. I'm going to call that items, and that is equal to, and maybe I'll put in there donut, sandwich, and froyo, just so I have some data to test it with. Okay, so I'm going to create an array. I'll pass that in as my extra, and then we'll use that intent to start the other activity. So start activity, pass in that intent. Okay. So if I've got all my cards right, I should be able to click on the card icon and get that. Okay. Now, one of the things you might notice on that second screen, right? Take a look at the top bar. So any problems here? Anything you should notice?
You're missing the back arrow.
Okay, we're missing the back arrow. And what else?
It doesn't say my cart.
It doesn't say my cart, or it doesn't say, you know, what I would expect there to be a name there, right? So how can I fix both of those problems?
In the manifest file.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the manifest. All right, what do I want to change here?
The order activity entry. You need to add the inside of that. Add the stuff to make it a child.
Okay.
Main activity.
Okay.
So
what attribute do I need to put in there?
I think it's parent name, something like this.
Okay. So parent activity name. Yep. And so that would point to main activity. What do I need to change? So that'll give me the arrow. What about the text? How can I change the text there?
Isn't that label?
Yep, that's the label. Okay. So if I say label, I might put that in as my cart or order. Is there anything else I need to do there?
do we need the metadata stuff for parent activity?
Yep, you do need that for backwards compatibility and in terms of making the @compat library work. So where do you find that metadata? What metadata tag do I need to put there?
Metadata inside of that, name and value.
Okay, so what's the name?
Android.support.parentActivity.
Okay. All right, and so the value of that needs to be what?
It's that main activity.
probably main activity. Now, one of the things to remember, with this metadata, that it can't just be dot parent activity. I need to actually, oh, that messed up. What do I need to actually put in here? Remember, it's not just that.
The project path.
Also known as the package name, right? So where can I find my package name?
At the top of the screen.
Correct. Right. So your package name will probably be different than mine because mine's got PR Smith in there. Yours should have your student name. Okay. So we've got that. One of the things that's commonly forgotten is that this label here is something that needs to be translated as well. So we do need to remember to extract that string. So you want to go extract string resource, and I might call this activity order to pull that out.
Where was that at?
That was Alt-Enter. Okay, so we've got those two problems fixed. So we've got the parent activity set and we've got the label set. So that bar is appearing correct. So the last thing we need to do to kind of finish this application off is to just actually get it to build out the list or the array of items, right? So what I want it to do is anytime I click one of these buttons, I want it to remember that. And then later when I click on the cart button, it will then shoot all that information over. Okay. So what do I need to put in to accomplish that so it'll remember what I've ordered? What do I need to add?
If you wanted to remember what's been ordered, you'd have to add it to what you're passing, right? The items list.
Okay. So right now I've just hard-coded the items list.
Shouldn't you make a private variable at the top?
That sounds like a good start. All right. So private what?
String array.
Okay. So
Wouldn't you basically take that line and put it at the top and then just get rid of the line 33?
Well,
you don't just hard code the values.
Well, let's say I do that. And move it up like so. Okay. Well, what do you mean not hard code the values? What should I put on the right hand side then? Should I assign it to anything?
We have to specify a length because it's an array.
We do. One of the things I would say is usually you want to avoid creating any new objects up here. So, for instance, you could say new string 10. The problem is that this line of code here, this new string 10, that occurs before onCreate has had a chance to run. And that can be a problem in terms of memory consumption and other reasons. So you typically want to avoid doing that logic up here. So if you want to create an array, you typically want to do that inside of onCreate and not up where you declare your variables. Does that make sense? Now, one of the issues I have here is I want to be able to add things into my cart, but the problem with using a string array is I kind of have to resize the array anytime I want to. I have to deal with resizing the array every time I add a new thing. Does that make sense? or I'm going to have an upper limit. But I don't want to have an upper limit, right? So what could I use instead that would mean I don't have an upper limit to how many things I can add?
A list.
List. That sounds good. All right. So let's change this from being a string array to maybe this is an array list of strings. Okay. So that's good. Now, obviously, when I construct it, I'm going to need to construct it correctly. So new array list string. And so that's going to start with it being empty. All right, so that's a good start. Now what?
On click, you just add a value to the list.
Okay, so how do I, what line of code, how should I write that code? Well, I might say items.add, and I think this is part of where you ran in. This is the kind of thing that you were asking about, Paul. You might have said r.string. Maybe I want to say let's use this message here, r.string cart donut. Now you remember that I said this is a integer. This is not a string because it's the ID of the resource.
I'm pretty sure I used ID for that. Mm-hmm. Just not thinking or not having done it before. I just thought that would work.
Yeah. So if not kind of thinking about what I'm doing there, maybe I say, well, let's do string value of, right? And so take that ID, turn it into a string. Okay, this is not going to be what we want, but I just want to illustrate, what we get out of this. So I'm going to say string.value of that. And now let's try it. So there's two issues here I want to show you, which are kind of common things that you run into. So first of all, if I click here, you'll see that the application crashed. Everybody saw that? Click cart, it went away.
Yeah.
So the problem is I'm passing a list of strings here, but over an order activity, I want an array of strings. Got it? So when I ask for get string array extra, this actually comes back as null. So when it tries to go do the loop here on line 22, it's going to say, well, items.length, that's going to crash because the array is null. So if I want to have it be received over on the other side as an array, I've got two options. I've got one option is I could say, well, let's just use a list on both sides. My other option is to, convert this list to an array. Okay. Now, there are a few ways to do that. There are a few ways to take a list and turn it into an array. In reality, I think the easiest one is to just say to array, because we're just going from an array of a list of the things to an array of those things.
What's the advantage of the array again? Why bother with it? Is it just faster?
Well, the reason I'm showing you is because sometimes you'll need those, especially because we haven't talked about how to send objects. Does that make sense? So if I wanted to send prices as well, right? Well, then I'd need potentially an array of strings, the name of the products, and array of the prices of the products. Does that make sense? So sometimes you'll run into this where, because we haven't talked about parsables, we haven't talked about how to send objects into bundles, you may need to send it as arrays. Now here it's actually still failing because the type that toArray returns is actually an array of objects. So a quirky thing with Java, if I want it to get, if I want it to have it as actually an array of strings to this toArray call, I do actually have to call a different version of it. So the version I need to call, I believe I can call it like, can I call it like so? No, I can't call it like so. So I have to actually give it an array. And if I remember right, cast null. Let's see if that works. No, that doesn't work. So I do have to say new string array, and this would be items dot length.
Isn't it dot size because it's a list?
Oh, you're right. It is dot size. Yes, it is a list. It's not an array. Right. Okay. And it's still blank. Why is it? Oh, because I never actually added anything. That's why. So hit donut, go to next. There we go. So there's you can see this number here.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm going wrong, is because that's the ID of the resource. So it's for all intents and purposes, it's generally you can consider it basically random, because it's not even guaranteed if I run the program again that it necessarily will be the same number. So the proper way to get this ID to the string value is to rather not call string.valueof, but to call getString and pass that in. So getString will take the resource ID and give you back the actual string. So that's what you need to remember to use, is getString. Does that help your earlier question, Paul?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I thought I used that too, but
okay.
Something the syntax.
Yeah.
I'll do it next time.
Yeah. So you basically have to take the ID, pass it in and getString. That'll give you back the actual string resource. Okay. So another thing I might mention, this is one way to take it and convert it to take a list, convert it to a string. If you are going to say convert a list, if you've got a list of strings, you're going to an array of strings. That's one way you can do it. This way doesn't work if you're saying going from a list of employees to a list of strings, or a list of transactions to a list of strings. So a lot of times you may need to kind of break things up into parallel arrays to do that. If you want to pass data around. So the way I end up actually making that conversion typically is I go actually use a loop. So if I'm going to write this using a loop, I would say let's make a string array. And maybe I'll call this items array. And this is going to be a new string array. And so this would be kind of items.size for int I is equal to 0. I is less than the items.size. So I'm going to loop through the list. Plus I, and then here I want to copy things from the list over to the array one by one. So items I is equal to items get I. So that kind of blueprint is oftentimes one of the things that you end up needing to do to pass data around, is oftentimes you have to kind of loop through the list and build up the array that way. Any questions on that? What?
No, you don't have the .add for the other two.
I don't have the
images.
Yeah, Yeah, so I need to add that in for the other two buttons. So add that in, change their messages. So I should be able to add that now. Froyo, there. Okay, so those three things have been added to the cart. That works perfectly fine. I can add them again, and we'll see. Oh, well, that did not work. Order activity.
You added the toast. You added the toast again. So that's the toast message just showing up instead of just a simple string, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I changed it to get string, yada yada, get string in the ID. Okay, you got it sorted. Cool. So that's kind of mostly set up. Things that you'll notice here, if I click the back button with the arrow and come back in here, it should see they're added. But you'll notice if I hit that up arrow, that kind of we lose all of our data. Do you see that?
Yeah.
If I use the back arrow. So you remember I kind of talked about how to fix that, because the back arrow and the up arrow and the back arrow do different things. So just as a kind of refresher on that, the method that you have to override is on option item selected. And we'll actually get to this method pretty soon here. And I want to say if item, let's see, I want to get the ID of the item that was selected. Int item ID is equal to item dot get item ID if item ID is android.r.home r.id.home. Then I want to return true. And
you need on back pressed too, don't you?
Yes, I do need on back pressed. So on back pressed, and then otherwise we call the super implementation. So that's the part to remember, is your kind of workaround.
Doesn't that go in the main activity?
No, it actually, you could put it in main activity. It actually really doesn't matter because there's no up arrow on the main activity. Where you need it is here in the child.
Okay.
So that fixes the problem that we had there, where the back button and the up navigation work differently. Another thing to kind of pay attention to, if I turn this sideways, you see as long as you're on the add cart, it's fine, right? There's no serialization that we need to do in terms of on save state or on restore, because when I create the new one, it's going to come back and call on create. So remember, this data is populated from the intent, so we just go back to on create, right? So in terms of configuration changes on order activity, we don't actually need to do anything. Everybody with me there?
Yep.
Because that data is all being loaded in on create. On the flip side, we do have to change this activity, because if I turn it sideways, we're going to lose that list of items that we have saved. So I do need to save that in main activity, even though I don't have anything to save, even though if I'm on order activity, it works, right? So sometimes you have to check all of your different activities to make sure that the saving and loading works, because it might work on one, but not on the other. Everybody with me?
Yep.
Okay, so in here, let's think about what we need to do. So I might say on save instance state, And so in terms of what I need to save, I might say outstate dot put. And typically, you may end up needing to do the same trick. So I might need to take the items and turn them into an array so that I can save them. So I'm going to do that same thing here, and then say outstate put string array. And so this might be items and the items array. And I could have directly put the string array. That's fine here. Again, just kind of making sure that you have the tools to work with a list as that comes up. And then when I restore it, then I would kind of pull it out in the reverse way. So I would say the items array is equal to saved instance state dot get string array. So get the string array out. I put it in as items, so I'm going to pull it back out as items. And then I would loop through each of those one by one. Now here I loop through the list because that was kind of where the source of truth was at that point. But here, because I built it in I'm pulling it in from the array, going from the array back to the list, I need to actually loop through the array first. So I'm going to say items array dot length, and then put that in back one by one back into the list. So items dot add. So add, and that should be items array I.
Where did line 66? Where did saved instance state come from?
It's a parameter here to the function.
Oh, all right. I had mine set as bundle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just pulled the names that they gave it this time. So that should lead to kind of my values being saved. So, I'm basically taking the list, turning it into an array, and then I'm taking the array and coming back to a list. And the only reason I'm doing that is to just illustrate what you would need to do if we were, for instance, having prices or an array of objects here, a list of objects, which is normally what you end up with. Cool. Any questions? Zach, did you have something?
Can we stay on this page just for a second?
Okay.
Is the reading for this chapter due today or tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow. Let me see real quick if there's anything else we need to do. Coding challenge. Yeah. Okay. So the kind of one outstanding task that I'll leave as an exercise for you to figure out how to do is it works just fine right now on lands, on portrait. You'll need to create a layout variant to make it work on landscape. So
Is that like the Code Labs homework or something?
Yeah, that'll be the homework. One thing I will say about the instructions, though, on the homework, the instructions in the homework tell you to use this expand or horizontally, this pack button. Don't do that because what you'll end up with if you do that is you'll find that all of your basically it automatically picks a size, gives a fixed size to your controls. So this is actually, that's a button you want to avoid in terms of keeping your layout scalable. The other thing it does, it actually ends up, but what it does is it evenly divides the screen space, but it evenly divides whatever you have in the designer. So for instance, if you design that for a 10-inch tablet and say expand virtually, it'll be a third of that 10-inch tablet, not a third of any screen sizes. So I do want you to figure out there's some hints as to how to kind of make it look. The one thing I'd ask is don't use that button. Don't use the expand horizontally button. Cool.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, not bad. Nice little softball.
So, and we'll kind of build on this. Tomorrow I'll have a worksheet for you guys to do for the 4.1 labs.
Okay, the labs aren't known right now. You didn't release that. We'll get that tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll give you a sheet tomorrow.
Okay.
So, basically, what I want you to do is kind of come up with a project on your own. So we'll have a little bit of guidance around that, as far as what you pick one of these options, kind of similar to how we did last semester. Pick from one of these projects and build on it. So that's kind of where that's going to be next week. This week, with that worksheet. So you can kind of think about, what might you want to build with the tools you have. And I'll just have some more specifics on, that tomorrow. Cool.
All right, are we good to head off on our own?
You are absolutely good to head off on your own. So you've got the reading material there on perusal. That's the thing I'd like you to do in terms of homework today. Is go through the reading material. In the reading assignment, there's a few links to the Android, to the material design documents. And so if you go to, all of those are on material.io as the website. And go in here, material components, buttons. And I'm going to link those in here as kind of additional reading. I debated about putting those up on perusal, but decided to not do that. But those are definitely ones I recommend you kind of look at. What Android's recommendation is for how to use both the buttons and the floating action button. There's some kind of demos about how it looks. There's an implementation tab that will tell you how to kind of write the code for that. But it will give you a lot of do's and don'ts. For instance, here it'll say, do use capitalization, don't wrap the text. So those are good things to kind of review in terms of what the design guidelines are for both buttons and the floating action button. Cool.
So then, what is the homework? Is the homework homework, or is it part of the lab?
You're talking about the what?
Yeah, the code lab. Yeah.
Yeah. Just put that into this project here.
So the website material.io perusal, make this landscape. Yeah. That's our task.
So the one that's going in for this homework, it'll be on your this will be in as this will be in for a grade. This is doing the landscape thing. Doing perusal will obviously be for a grade. This additional reading on material.io is not required. It's not for a grade. It's just, hey, this is stuff that will tell you more than what's in the chapter. Does that make sense? So this is optional. Okay. Does that help answer that?
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is a good place to look and read more about what's in the chapter, but it's not for a grade. There's just a lot of stuff that though isn't in the chapter, so that's why I point to it. Sorry.
All right, sweet.
Sorry for the confusion there. Okay, so that's what I got for today, and I'll see you in class tomorrow. We've got an in-person day tomorrow and Friday.
Right on. See you tomorrow, Mr. Smith. Can you help me with this this button thing? It's all it's all messed up. Okay.
Yeah, let's see if we can sort that out. Let me kill my